Casimir Dravos didn't come to Ashcroft Vale to rescue anyone. He came to sign. In 15 minutes, his lawyers would slide a number across the table, large enough to swallow the whole firm, and he'd walk out, owning a clean, respectable front for money that could never be counted out loud. He'd bought a dozen companies like it. He had never once bothered to learn the names of the people inside them. Then a man in an expensive suit called a woman to the front of the room to make an example of her, and Casimir, standing unnoticed at the back, went very still. By the time he left, the deal was dead. The man's life was already coming apart, and no one in that room understood what had just happened. The city always looked cleanest from the back of Casimir's car. 40 floors of glass slid past the tinted window like something behind an aquarium wall, silent and far away. He preferred it that way. Distance made everything manageable. People, deals, and the occasional problem that had to be solved with more than money. All of it was easier to handle when you never had to stand close enough to smell it. 15 minutes early, Emmerich said from the front seat, not turning around. Ashby's already in the conference room. He keeps refilling the water glasses himself. Man sweating through a $4,000 jacket. Let him pour, Casimir said. Emmerich Straub had been with him 9 years. Long enough to fill silences without being asked, and more importantly, to know when not to. He handled the noise, the lawyers, the phones, the men who needed to be reminded of things they had promised. Casimir handled the quiet. In his experience, the quiet was where every deal was won, and where every one of them was actually lost. Ashcroft Vale was a mid-year commercial development firm with a good name and thin margins. It built glass towers exactly like the one they were parked beneath, financed them through respectable banks, and kept books that, on the surface, were spotless. That was the entire point. An organization like Casimir's didn't need another warehouse, or another crew, or another man with a gun. It needed skin, a legitimate, boring, well-regarded company through which certain sums could walk in dirty and stroll out clean, wearing a suit and a smile and a quarterly report. Ashcroft Vale was going to be that skin. Its founder was retiring to a vineyard. He'd never actually work. Its partners were about to become very rich and very compliant, which in Casimir's experience were the same condition. And its employees would keep coming to the same desks, drinking the same bad coffee, never knowing the building had changed hands beneath their feet. None of them knew who was buying. That was deliberate, and it had cost a great deal of legal effort to keep it that way. The firm had been told only that an investment group was completing due diligence, that a representative would sit in on the final presentation, and that discretion would be appreciated on all sides. The name Dravos appeared on no document a junior employee would ever see. It appeared on very few documents at all. As far as the sign-in sheet at the front desk was concerned, Casimir was a consultant, one grayer man in a good coat, there to observe. He liked it that way. He liked it more than he liked almost anything else about his work. He always arrived early, and he always arrived unannounced, because he had learned something a long time ago that had never once failed him. You never saw the truth of a place after it knew you were coming. The truth was in the 10 minutes before, in how people spoke to the ones beneath them, when they believed no one who mattered was in the room, in who got interrupted and who got thanked, in whose name got left off the memo. Casimir had made himself very rich reading those books. He stepped out of the car and into the lobby's cold marble hush. No one looked twice. He signed the name that wasn't his, clipped on a visitor badge, and rode the elevator up alone, watching the floors climb. He had no idea he was about to see exactly the kind of truth he'd trained himself to look for, and that it would cost the man in the expensive suit everything he had. The 41st floor smelled of burnt coffee and panic. Maren Voss noticed both the instant the elevator doors opened, the way she noticed everything. The flickering H in the illuminated Ashcroft Vale sign behind reception, the client folder, someone had collated out of order. The fact that the good conference room's projector had been throwing a faint green cast, for 3 days, and no one had done anything about it, because no one but her ever seemed to see it. She was already crouched under the credenza fixing it. When the diligence representative walked in, she didn't look up. She had 90 seconds before the partners flooded the room, and a loose display cable was exactly the kind of small, invisible disaster that ended up being somebody's fault. It always ended up being hers. "Try it now," she said to the AV kid, and the green cast vanished, and the projected slide snapped to clean white. She exhaled, sat back on her heels, and pushed a strand of dark hair out of her face with the back of her wrist. From the far end of the room, a man she didn't recognize watched her do it. She registered him only vaguely. Gray coat, gray man, one of the money people here to sit and initial things, and dismissed him because money people never mattered to her day. It was the partners who could hurt her, and the partners were about to arrive. Marin was 29 and had worked at Ashcroft Vale for 5 years. In that time, she had built the financial models that underpinned every major deal the firm had closed, taught 3 separate partners how to read their own spreadsheets without embarrassing themselves, and rescued more presentations than she could count from the podium of some man who hadn't opened the deck until that morning. She was, by any honest measure, the reason the firm still stood. She was also, by every official measure, an associate, underpaid, unpromoted, and so thoroughly taken for granted that partners spoke over her in meetings the way you'd speak over an air conditioner. Present, useful. Not really a person in the room. She dressed the part they'd assigned her. Plain, gray, practical flats. Nothing that asked to be looked at. She had learned early, earlier than she liked to remember, that being underestimated was the closest thing to armor a woman like her could afford. Let them think she was furniture. Furniture heard everything, sat quietly in the corner of every meeting, and remembered every number, every promise, every quiet cruelty, and filed it away where it could be found again. Voss, a partner passing behind her, didn't slow down. Coffees and the Heartline projections, printed before the buyers sit. "They're already at each seat," she said. He was already gone, and had not heard her, and would not have cared. The man in the gray coat, at the back, heard her, heard the particular flatness of a person who has stopped expecting to be answered, and made a small private note of it. The room began to fill, partners in their good suits, the 2 lawyers from the buying group, with their identical leather folders, and last, sliding in through the glass door with a laugh already on his face, Tobin Hale. Marin's stomach dropped a familiar inch. Tobin had joined the firm 2 years after she had, on the strength of a handshake and a father who golfed with Gideon Ashby. Within 18 months, he'd made junior partner. He was handsome in a rehearsed way, quick with a compliment, generous with credit that wasn't his to give, and he had, at various points, presented 3 of Marin's models to the board as his own work, while she sat 6 feet away and said nothing. He had also, for one very bad year, been the man she went home to, a fact almost no one at the firm knew, and one she had spent the 10 months since their split trying to bury under sheer competence. He'd ended it by text, on a Tuesday. While she was at her desk, he'd kept the apartment they had picked out together. He'd kept somehow every mutual friend and every good opinion in the building, because being liked was the one thing Tobin Hale had ever truly worked at. He caught her eye across the room now and smiled, warm and public and utterly hollow. "Big day," he said, to the room, to the buyers, to no one. "Let's give our guests something to write home about." Casimir, from the back, said nothing. He'd taken the seat no one offers a stranger, the one against the wall, half in shadow, angled so he could see every face without any face quite seeing him. He had come to watch a company in the last unguarded minutes, before it learned it was owned, and he had learned to watch without flinching, without sentiment. And what he saw in the 90 seconds before the lights dimmed told him more than 4 months of due diligence had, He watched the way every person in that room moved around the woman in gray, as if she were weather, something you dressed for and complained about, and never once thanked. He watched a partner set an empty cup down at her elbow, without breaking his sentence. He watched her fix a folder no one had noticed was broken, straighten a row of chairs, catch an error on a printed page, and correct it with a pen from her own pocket. And he watched the handsome one smile at her across the room, like a man who already knew where the knife was kept, and how quietly it could go in the lawyers, open their folders. Gideon Ashby cleared his throat and welcomed their distinguished guests. The lights dimmed a notch. And then the buyers asked the one hard question. The deck couldn't answer a discrepancy in the Heartline numbers, a gap of $4 million that shouldn't have been there, and every head at the table turned to Tobin Hale, who had put his name on that model without ever reading a line of it. Marin saw the panic flash behind his easy smile. She saw him understand, in half a second, that he was about to be exposed in front of the most important people ever to sit in that room. And she saw him decide what to do about it, saw the decision arrive and settle and harden into a smile, the way she'd once watched him decide, over dinner, to let a waiter take the blame for a mistake that had been his. Actually, Tobin said, his voice smooth as he turned and pointed across the room, that's Marin's section. Marin, why don't you come up here and explain to everyone how your numbers ended up $4 million short? For a moment, Marin didn't move. The whole room had turned toward her. The partners, the two lawyers, the gray stranger against the wall, and the projector hummed its faint electric note into a silence that had gone brittle. Tobin stood at the head of the table, with his arms still extended, finger pointed down its length at her, wearing the patient, generous expression of a man doing everyone a favor. "Come on," he said, softer now, coaxing, as if she were being shy in front of company. "Don't be nervous, just walk us through how it happened." She stood, her chair rolled back too loudly on the hard floor. She was aware of her own hands, of the flats she'd chosen, so she'd never accidentally tower over a partner, of the $4 million now hanging in the air, with her name freshly stapled to it. She walked to the front because there was nothing else to do, and because 5 years of hard training told her that the fastest way through a fire was to keep your face still and your voice level. "The Heartline model," she said, reaching for the clicker, pulls its escalation schedule from the Master Assumptions tab. If the gap is on the revenue line, it's almost certainly a single linked cell that broke when someone edited the source. It's a 5-minute fix, and I can show you exactly where. See? This is what I mean. Tobin cut across her, turning to the buyers with a rueful little laugh. One professional to another over her head. She gets deep in the weeds, very technical, very detailed. But at the end of the day, he spread his hands. Somebody built this model, somebody signed off on it, and it went out the door. 4 million light. I've been carrying this account personally for 2 years. I trusted the work. He let that land. I trusted her. The betrayal of it was so smooth that it took Marin a full second to feel the blade slide home. He wasn't just deflecting. He was rewriting 2 years of history in a single sentence, in front of the only audience that could ever matter to any of them, recasting himself as the burned and generous mentor, and her as the careless girl who had let him down out of some private carelessness. "That's not what happened," she said. "It's fine," he said gently, as though calming an animal. "Mistakes happen. Nobody's angry. I just wish you'd flagged it before we were sitting in front of our partners and our guests. That's all." He looked at Gideon Ashby, man to man, one adult to another. "I'll own the oversight. I should have double-checked her math myself. That one's on me for trusting too much." Something in the room shifted, the way a crowd leans without anyone appearing to move. She saw it happen on the partners' faces, the quiet recalibration, the small physical relief of having found someone to blame who sat outside the room's real power structure. She had seen that exact shift 100 times before, always from the safety of the furniture, always as it landed on someone else, never once from the center of it. with the whole weight turning toward her. At the back of the room, the gray stranger had not moved and had not spoken, but he had set down his water glass, and he was no longer watching Tobin. He was watching the partners fold, one face at a time, into the comfortable lie, and he was counting them the way a man counts exits. Marin. Gideon's voice was cool and even, the voice of a chairman who has decided which way a thing will go. Is that true? Did the model leave this office with an error in it? And here was the trap, fully built and sprung. Because the model had left with an error in it, an error she had caught and flagged in writing 11 days ago. In an email, Tobin had told her to her face he would handle upward. An email, she now understood, with a cold clarity, he had buried on purpose, precisely so that this exact moment could one day exist. To defend herself now, she would have to call a junior partner a liar, in front of the men buying the company, with no proof in her hand but her own word, while every incentive in that room begged them to believe him instead of her. She felt her face go hot, and she hated that most of all. The heat climbing her neck, the sting behind her eyes, the body betraying her right, when the mind was still upright and fighting. I flagged the discrepancy on the 3rd, she said, as steadily as she could manage, which was steadier than she'd expected. By email, to Tobin. Tobin's expression flickered, just once. Just for her, a hairline crack. Only she was close enough to see, and then resolved into wounded patience. I don't have any email like that, he said sadly, but we can absolutely look into it. Later. When it's just us. Right now these good people flew across the country to be here, and I honestly think we've embarrassed ourselves in front of them enough for one morning. He put a hand on her shoulder, in front of everyone. Warm, heavy, proprietary, forgiving. Why don't you go get everyone some fresh coffee? And let the adults sort out the numbers. Okay? Go on. Go get everyone some fresh coffee. There it was, the whole thing, the entire architecture of 5 years, compressed into 8 words in front of the most important room of her life. Not you're wrong. Not you're fired. Something worse and older and far more precise. You don't count. You were never going to count. You are the help. Fetch. The laugh that went around the table was small and grateful and appalling. The laugh of people relieved that an uncomfortable thing had been resolved without any cost to themselves. One of the partners actually said, "Cream, no sugar for me, thanks, Marin," and reached for his phone, the matter already closed in his mind. She stood at the front of the room with Tobin's hand on her shoulder, and 41 floors of glass and gray sky at her back, and she understood with total crystalline clarity that if she cried, she lost, and if she fought, she lost, and if she went and fetched the coffee like a good piece of furniture. There was no version of the next 30 seconds where she walked out intact. He had built it that way. It was the one thing he had ever been excellent at, finding the exact configuration of a room in which another person had no move left to make. She reached up and removed his hand from her shoulder, deliberately, finger by finger, and she set it back at his side. "Get your own coffee, Tobin," she said very quietly. His smile didn't move, but his eyes went flat and cold, and she knew in that instant she'd just made it worse. Knew she'd handed him the exact excuse he'd been fishing for from the start. Wow! He turned to the room, all wounded, weaponized charm. Okay, honestly, that right there is the attitude that got us into this. I have tried to protect this hire for 2 years, Gideon, I really have. But I think we've all just seen the problem for ourselves. In the flesh. He shook his head, sorrowful and magnanimous. And at the back of the room, in the seat, no one had thought to offer him. The gray stranger picked his water glass back up, took one unhurried sip, set it down again, and finally spoke. "Before anyone goes for coffee," Casimir said, "I'd like to see the email." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There was a texture to it, an evenness, a total absence of effort or heat. that made everyone in the room turn as if a light somewhere had changed color. The partners had spent the last 10 minutes comfortably forgetting he was there. Now they remembered him all at once, and not one of them could have explained why the forgetting suddenly felt like the most dangerous thing they'd done all day. Tobin recovered first, because recovering was his single greatest gift. "I'm sorry, mister. I don't think we've been—" "You said there's no email," Casimir went on, ignoring the outstretched hand and the question attached to it, his eyes on Tobin and only Tobin. "She said she sent one on the 3rd. One of those two statements is true, and one of them is not. It will be sitting on a server somewhere in this building. It will have a timestamp on it no one can move. So let's simply look." He tilted his head a precise fraction. "Unless you can think of a reason we shouldn't." The two lawyers beside him had gone very still, in the particular way of people who know their principal well enough to understand that his calm is the setting that should frighten you. "With respect," Gideon Ashby said, gathering the full authority of the man whose name was etched on the lobby wall, "this is an internal personnel matter, and our guests really don't need to be troubled with." "Your guests," Casimir said, "are the only reason there's a check in that folder for you to sign." He let the sentence sit in the air until it had weight. "I have spent 4 months and a considerable amount of money deciding whether the people who run this company can be trusted to keep running it once it's mine. That is the entire purpose of due diligence." He looked, slowly, unhurried, around the length of the table, letting each partner feel the pass of his attention like a hand testing a lock. "I have learned more about this company in the last 4 minutes than in the previous 4 months, so yes, I believe I would like to see the email." Marin stood frozen at the front of the room. Coffee fetcher? Accused? Dismissed? And now, impossibly, the axis the room had begun to rotate around. She did not understand who this man was. She only understood that the temperature had dropped, that the partners who had been so comfortable 10 seconds ago were now sitting bolt upright in their good suits, and that the easy color in Tobin's face had drained by a visible shade. "It's really not appropriate to go digging through private," Tobin began. "IT can pull it in 90 seconds, Casimir said without looking at him. He turned instead to Marin, and looked at her directly for the first time, and his voice when it reached her was not warm. Warmth would have been the wrong word for it. It was something steadier and rarer than warmth. It was attention. "Miss Voss, the 3rd of the month. Who did you copy on it?" She swallowed. Her throat was dry. "Records," she said. "I copy records on every single model sign-off. Always have. It's a standing habit. It's automatic. I don't even think about it." Something moved at the corner of Casimir's mouth. That was not quite a smile, but shared a border with one. "Of course you do," he said. Because that was the thing about the woman everyone in the building had spent 5 years treating as weather. She documented. She copied records. She kept the receipts on a system nobody ever thought to check, because nobody ever thought about her at all. He had watched her fix a cable no one else could see, correct a folder no one else had noticed, absorb a public humiliation with a straight spine. And he had known, with the flat certainty of a man who has read 10,000 real ledgers, that a person built like that does not lose $4 million. A person built like that is the sole reason the other 400 million is still sitting safely where it belongs. "Pull the record," Casimir said to the room, and it was not a request, and every person present finally understood that it had never been one. Gideon Ashby, after one long, calculating look at the two lawyers, and the folder, and the whole shape of the future arranging itself in front of him, gave a small nod to the AV kid, who was, it turned out, already quietly typing. Tobin Hale said, "This is insane." And then half a beat later, "Gideon, are we really going to let A?" And then he said nothing at all, because the search results were already climbing up onto the big screen behind Marin's head, in clean white letters 4 feet tall for the entire room to read. The email loaded, from N. Voss, 2 T. Hale, CC, Records, sent, the 3rd, 8:47 a.m. Subject, Heartline model escalation error, correct before sign-off. And below it, in Marin's plain, careful, unmistakable prose, 3 short paragraphs identifying the exact linked cell, the exact $4 million gap, and how to repair it, and then a single closing line that filled the screen like an accusation carved into stone. Do not send to client until this is corrected. Confirm you have fixed it on your end. E. Nobody breathed. E. The AV kid, to his eternal credit, scrolled down without being asked to, and there it was, chasing the flag down the screen. Tobin's reply, sent 9 minutes later at 8:56 a.m., exactly 2 words long. Handled. The silence that followed had a physical weight to it. Marin stared at her own words standing 12 feet tall on the wall and felt something complicated crack open in her chest. Not triumph, not yet. Nothing as clean as that, just the strange, vertiginous, almost unbearable experience of being seen. A truth she had carried entirely alone for a week and a half was suddenly hanging in the air of the largest room in the building, dated and time-stamped, where not one person present could pretend it away. That could mean anything, Tobin said, and the music had gone out of his voice entirely. Handled could mean a dozen things. I was managing a huge account. I get hundreds of these. You can't just... It means you were told, in writing, 11 days ago, Casimir said, and you let the model go to the client anyway. And then, when the gap surfaced in front of me, you put the whole of it onto her, in a room you had every reason to believe was full of people who could never afford to hurt you. He rose from his chair, unhurried, and buttoned his jacket with 2 fingers. He was not a physically large man, and yet the room seemed to reorganize itself around wherever he chose to stand. I want to be precise about what I watched happen in here because I found precision matters more than almost anything else. You didn't panic, Mr. Hale. Panic I could have understood. Panic I might even have respected a little. What you did was calculate. In the space of half a second, you saw a way to spend her in order to save yourself, and you spent her without so much as a flicker of hesitation, and you did it with your hand resting on her shoulder. He began to cross the room, slowly, and the partners parted out of his path, without appearing to decide to. Here is what genuinely interests me, Casimir continued, almost conversational now, almost warm, which was worse. For 4 straight months, every single person I sent quietly through this firm came back to me with the same note. Ashcroft Vale runs clean, runs smart, never misses a deadline, never blows a model, and never drops a detail. And I kept asking the same question, how? A shop this exact size, with these exact margins, staffed by these exact people? He let his gaze travel the table again, and each partner in turn felt it land somewhere private and unlit. I could not find the reason anywhere on the org chart. It took me until this morning to understand why. The reason wasn't on the org chart. The reason was being sent to get the coffee. He stopped a few feet from Marin, not crowding her, leaving her room to stand in, and spoke past her shoulder to the men who had run her life. You have been operating this entire company on the unpaid, uncredited, unprotected labor of the one person all of you felt most comfortable humiliating in public. That is either the single stupidest thing I have witnessed in a boardroom this year, or the single most arrogant. I've been standing here trying to decide which, and I genuinely cannot. Who are you? Tubin said, and it came out cracked down the middle. Casimir turned to face him fully. And for the first time, he let them see the thing that lived underneath the calm. Not peace at all, but its exact opposite, a stillness that was pressurized and immense, the held quiet of enormous force choosing for now not to move. My name, he said, is Casimir Dravos. He watched the 2 lawyers flinch in unison. He watched Gideon Ashby's face go, the exact gray of the marble, in the lobby 41 floors down, because Gideon, unlike every other soul in the room, had done just enough business in the unlit places to know precisely what that name meant. Gideon knew that the polite investment group had always been a courtesy fiction wrapped around something else. He knew whose money had just walked into his conference room wearing a borrowed visitor badge. And he knew, with a lurch of pure animal fear, that the tidy fairy tale of a clean acquisition had a second floor he had never shown a single member of his staff. Marin watched the name land, watched it mean absolutely nothing to her, and mean absolutely everything to the powerful men who signed her paychecks. And she filed that away too, the way she filed everything, for later. "I came here this morning to buy this company," Casimir said into the ringing silence. "I have just this moment changed my mind about the terms." He looked at Tobin Hale, and his voice did not rise. And somehow, that was the most frightening part of all of it. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. You are going to want to be sitting for the rest of this." And then he turned away from all of them, toward the woman in gray no one had ever bothered to watch. Now the only person in the room he seemed able to see, and he said the sentence that detonated the last standing wall of the old order. "Miss Voss, everything you've built inside this place, every model, every quiet fix, every receipt you kept because some part of you always knew a day like this one was eventually going to come. I want to hear about all of it." He glanced back once around the table, and his expression when it passed over the partners was something close to contempt. "But not in here. Get your coat. These people don't get to be in the room for what happens next." Marin got her coat. She didn't fully decide to. Her body simply followed the instruction, the way it had followed instructions inside that building for 5 years, and she was 3 steps down the glass corridor, beside Casimir Dravos, before her mind caught all the way up to the fact that she was walking out of the most important meeting of her career, in the exact middle of it, at the invitation of a man whose name had just turned every partner she had to stone. Behind them, the conference room had erupted into low, frantic noise. Gideon's voice pitched to reason, a lawyer's cutting under it, and above both of them Tobin's, rising with a shrill, unmistakable edge of a man trying to talk his way back onto solid ground and discovering, one grab at a time, that there was no longer any ground there to reach. Casimir did not look back, not once. He walked the way he spoke, without hurry, without wasted motion, as though the floor itself had agreed to keep arriving beneath his feet. M. Merrick. The 9-year man was already there, materializing from beside the reception desk, with a phone pressed to his ear and another in his hand. "The deal as drafted is dead. Call the lawyers off the closing before noon. I want a new structure on my desk by tonight." Emmerich's eyebrows didn't so much as twitch, which from him was the equivalent of another man dropping to the floor. The whole thing, start over." Casimir stopped at the elevator and finally turned, taking in the length of the floor behind him, the frozen receptionist, the partners spilling out through the glass doors of the conference room, and Tobin Hale standing in the doorway with his color gone and his mouth working around words that wouldn't form. "I'm not going to buy a company that doesn't know what it's actually made of," Casimir said. "So first," he pressed the call button with one knuckle, "we are going to find out precisely what it's made of, and who's been carrying it and who's been robbing it, in that order." "You cannot do this," Gideon Ashby said, arriving breathless at the front of the pack, 40 years of carefully compounded reputation cracking straight down the center of his face. "We had an agreement, Casimir. We shook on it. You gave me your word. I gave you my word. That I would buy a firm that runs clean," Casimir said, and his voice stayed perfectly, terribly level, which was worse in every way than shouting would have been. "You told me to my face, across 4 months, that it did. You let me sit across from you, and believe the reason it ran so clean was you and your partners." He nodded once, slightly, toward Marin at his side. "It was her. You knew it was her. Every one of you knew. And then you stood by and let that man put his theft on her, in front of my lawyers, to protect a deal you were arrogant enough to think was already closed." He let the silence do the rest of the work for him. You should have introduced us. On the very first day, Gideon, you'd have gotten a considerably better price for your building. The elevator opened with a soft chime. Casimir stepped inside. Marin, after a half-second, that felt exactly like the lip of a cliff, made herself step in beside him. Wait, Marin, wait. Tubin lunged a few steps forward, and for one last ugly instant, the old reflex fired in him, the lifelong certainty that if he could just get 30 unbroken seconds of anyone's ear, he could reshape the story back into a shape that served him. Marin, come on, it's me. Don't, whatever this is, whatever he's told you, don't go and do something you can't take back. You know me. You know I would never actually. The doors began to slide shut between them. I do know you, Tobin, Marin said, and her voice came out steadier than she had ever once heard it come out of her own mouth. That's the whole problem. I always did. The door shut on his face. The elevator dropped. For a long moment neither of them said anything at all, and Marin stood staring at her own reflection in the brushed steel of the doors. Gray suit, practical flats, a woman who, 20 minutes ago, had been ordered to fetch coffee for the adults, and was now falling 40 floors through the middle of a building beside a man. Doff. You should know something, Casimir said, watching the floor. Numbers count themselves down. I did not come here today to help you. I want to be honest with you about that, because I suspect very few people in your life have been. I came to buy a shell company and clean a great deal of money through it, and never once learn a single name inside these walls. He said it plainly, without apology or performance, a man laying a true and unflattering thing, face up on the table between them. I have spent my entire life not looking at people like you. It's easier that way. You stay furniture. I stay comfortable. The arrangement runs itself. The floors kept falling past, and then I stood in that room and watched you take that man's hand off your shoulder, finger by finger, without raising your voice, and I thought, there it is. There's the thing this company has been standing on top of for years, and not one of them ever once bothered to look down and see what was holding them up. Marin didn't know what to do with any of that, so she reached for the one true thing she had. They looked down all the time, she said. That's what stepping on something is. Something shifted across Casimir's face. Not a smile. Not yet, but the patch of ground where a smile might one day be built. No, he said quietly, as the elevator reached the lobby, and the doors slid open onto cold marble and flat gray daylight. That's finished now. As of this exact minute, the entire arithmetic of your life has changed, Miss Voss. And the men upstairs don't understand that yet. He stepped out into the light, but they're going to. He had walked into that building an hour ago to sign a check and learn no one's name. He was walking out of it, having killed the deal, humiliated the men who owned her, and pulled the one person nobody had ever watched straight out of the frame and into the light. And none of them, not Tobin, not Gideon, not Marin herself, yet understood that the real reason he'd overturned everything wasn't mercy, and had never been mercy. It was that he had just found, in the last unguarded corner of a rotten little firm, the first thing in years he considered worth going to war over. He took her to a place she had only ever seen from the sidewalk, a quiet restaurant tucked off the edge of the financial district, with no name on the door and no menu she could find, the kind of room where the staff greeted Casimir with the careful, practiced warmth reserved for men you very much did not want to disappoint. They were seated in a corner, out of every sightline, with a wall at her back for the first time all day. He ordered food she hadn't asked for, in a low voice, and when it arrived, he watched her not eat it. You're not hungry, he observed. I don't really eat when I'm gore. She stopped and started again. It's been a strange hour. Eat anyway. It wasn't unkind. It was the tone of a man deeply used to being obeyed, choosing, for once, to be gentle about the fact. You've been running on empty since long before you walked into that meeting this morning. I can see it on you. You've got the look. What look? The one people get when they've spent years spending themselves down faster than anything ever fills them back up. He leaned back in his chair. I know it, because I sign the paychecks of a great many people who wear it every day. I just never used to bother looking at their faces long enough to notice. She ate a little, because it was easier than arguing with him and because the food was quietly extraordinary, and because something in the sheer steadiness of him made the ground feel briefly, unfamiliarly solid under her. And slowly, in small pieces she had not meant to hand over, the real shape of her life began to come out of her, not all at once. And never because he pushed, he didn't interrogate her. He simply left silences open in the right places and let her decide what to set down inside them. And Marin, who could not remember the last time anyone had genuinely asked her about herself, and then waited for the answer, found the silences filling on their own. The salary she had never once fought for, 40,000 a year, half of what she was worth on her worst day. Because Tobin, back when they were still together, had told her over and over, warmly, reasonably, that loyalty always got noticed, in the end, that asking would come across as grasping and ungrateful. That she should let the quality of the work speak for itself. Advice she had swallowed whole and believed completely until 10 months ago, and understood only now, hearing it out loud in her own voice, had never been advice at all. It had been a leash handed to her with a smile that she had buckled around her own throat and thanked him for. The younger brother, Ansel, 3 years out from the accident that had taken the use of his legs and most of a settlement that had somehow never arrived, whose care and rent and endless quiet daily expenses of a body that fought him at every turn, she had carried alone on that salary by living in a studio apartment the size of a parking space and never spage, not once in 5 years, buying a single thing for herself. The careful way she had let the entire firm believe she had no life at all outside its walls, no one depending on her, nothing she couldn't afford to lose, because the alternative, letting any of them glimpse how badly she needed the job, felt exactly like handing a loaded weapon to people she already knew would use it. So you made yourself smaller, Casimir said, when she had finally wound down. On purpose, deliberately, right where they could all see you do it. It's armor, she said. If they think you don't need anything, then there's nothing they can take. That is not armor. He said it without any heat at all, turning his water glass a slow, absent quarter turn against the white cloth. That is a cage you built with your own hands, and then thanked the men outside it for the bars. He looked at her for a long, level moment. The one who told you loyalty gets noticed. The advice about the leash, that was him, wasn't it? The hand on the shoulder, the coffee. She nodded and hated the fresh heat that climbed her neck. We were together a year, she said. He ended it by text message, on a Tuesday, while I was at my desk 20 feet from his office. He kept the apartment we'd picked out together. He kept somehow every friend we had in common. Because being liked is the one thing on this earth Tobin has ever actually worked hard at. She turned her own glass now, a slow quarter turn, mirroring him without the faintest awareness that she was doing it. And then he just kept coming into work every morning and presenting my models to the board as his own, and I kept fixing his mistakes before anyone could see them. And I told myself the whole time that this was the mature thing to do. The professional thing. A short, terrible laugh escaped her. I built the thing he humiliated me with this morning. I built it, and I flagged it, and he buried the flag and kept it in a drawer for 11 days, and then took it out and used it on me like a knife. Honestly, that's almost funny, if you hold it up to the light at the right angle. Casimir did not laugh. He had gone very still, the same pressurized, immense quiet the whole conference room had felt roll off him an hour before, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped into a register that stood the hair up on her arms. Here is what I keep turning over, he said. A man does not calculate that fast, that smoothly, under that much sudden pressure, in front of that many important people, unless he has had a great deal of practice. Unless he has spent a long, comfortable while getting used to spending you in small ways, so that spending you all at once, in a large way, came to him as naturally as breathing. He tapped one finger once against the tabletop. This $4 million error you supposedly made. I want you to answer me something, precisely. In 5 years of building every serious model this firm has ever relied on, how many errors of that size have you actually made? Not caught in someone else's work, made yourself. Marin went cold through. Because the answer she had been far too battered all afternoon to walk herself to, was none. She did not make $4 million errors. She was the person to whom other people's $4 million errors were quietly handed to be made to disappear before dawn, which meant the gap in the Heartline model had never once, at any point, been a mistake at all. None, she whispered. None, Casimir agreed, very softly. So the 4 million did not fall out of that model by accident. It doesn't do that. It was walked out, on purpose, by someone who then needed a reason it had walked out, that pointed at absolutely anyone but himself. He needed a version of events in which the numbers were unreliable, and the woman who built them was careless and emotional, and, ideally, gone from the building by the end of the week. His eyes came up and found hers, and there was nothing gentle left in them now. He did not humiliate you this morning to protect his reputation, Miss Foss. That's what you were meant to think, and it's what everyone in that room did think. He humiliated you to bury a theft. And he had absolutely no idea, Casimir said, rising to his feet and extending one hand down to her, that the money he'd been stealing had already, weeks ago, stopped belonging to your little firm and started belonging to me. They worked through the night, not at the firm. Casimir would not put her back inside that building until he owned the ground it stood on down to the bedrock. But in a study on the top floor of a hotel, he apparently kept the way other men keep a spare coat, all dark wood and low warm lamps and a wall of glass looking out over the entire cold glittering sweep of the city. Emeric had her laptop brought up within the hour, retrieved from her desk by 2 large, quiet men who had not troubled themselves to ask the reception desk's permission. Casimir cleared the long table with a single sweep of his forearm, sending a stack of someone else's contracts to the floor, and said only, "Show me." And Marin, for the first time in 5 years, found herself standing in a room where the most powerful person present wanted, more than anything else, to watch her think. It changed her, hour by hour. The careful smallness she'd worn like a second skin began to slough off, because smallness had only ever been a tax she paid to people who could hurt her. And this man had spent the whole evening making it unmistakably clear that those people had, as of that morning, become his to deal with. She stopped softening her sentences. She stopped apologizing in advance of disagreeing. She pulled the Heartline model up onto the big screen and started walking the numbers backward through their own history, and her voice, once she got in deep enough, lost every last trace of the woman who'd been sent for coffee. Though, okay, here. Watch this. 3 hours in, hair pushed back off her face, 2 empty cups pushed to the side, she spun the laptop toward him. The 4 million doesn't vanish. That's the whole trick. That's exactly why nobody ever clocked it, because it's not missing, it moves. Heartline overpays a subcontractor, a grading and earthworks outfit called Meridian. 4 separate draws spread across the project, and every one of them lands just under the dollar threshold that would trigger a mandatory second signature. She pulled up the payment schedule. Nothing's ever round. Nothing ever crosses the line. It's disciplined, and it's patient. And here's the genuinely clever part. Meridian does real work. Real crew, real dirt moved, real invoices. So on paper, the payments are completely legitimate. You'd have to already be suspicious to even look. But you were suspicious, Casimir said. I built the model. I know what those numbers are supposed to do. She flipped to another window. So I pulled Meridian's filings. You've already pulled their filings, he noted. You did it hours ago. I did it the second I saw the name. She almost smiled. Meridian grading is 90 days old. Registered to a mailbox in a strip mall. No website, no history, no prior contracts anywhere, and its single-listed corporate officer isn't a person at all, it's a holding company, something called Calderon Trust. And Calderon Trust, Casimir said, is exactly where I hit the wall. She sat back. It's shielded, it's layered. Trust inside a holding company. Inside another trust. It's built by someone who knew precisely what they were doing. That's as far as a normal person, with a laptop and a subpoena they don't have, can possibly get. Casimir was quiet for a moment. Then he took out his phone, typed 4 short words into it, and set it face down on the table between them. You're not a normal person anymore, he said. Give it 20 minutes. It took 9. Imric came in without a knock, laid a single sheet of paper down beside Marin's laptop without a word, and withdrew. And Casimir watched her read it, and watched her whole face change as she reached the bottom of the page. Calderon Trust had exactly one true beneficial owner, sitting quietly at the very bottom of every layer built to hide him. Tobin Hale. He built a shell company to skim a firm that he already knew was about to be sold, she said slowly, working it out aloud as it assembled itself in front of her, and he timed the whole thing to the acquisition. Because he knew that in the chaos of a handover, new ownership, new systems, new accountants, everything migrating at once, $4 million scattered across 4 legitimate-looking subcontractor payments would simply never get reconciled. It would get folded into the buyer's books and written off as integration noise. He was going to let the deal close, let the money disappear into the seams, and walk away completely clean. She set the page down and her hand was not quite steady. He wasn't being reckless this morning. That's what I keep. He wasn't panicking. He was almost finished. He was days from the end of it. I was the only variable left standing. The one person who'd built that model, well enough to notice a gap, and kept records careful enough to prove where it went. So he tried to end me in that room, publicly, permanently, before the buyers ever got curious enough to pull the thread themselves. She looked up. He nearly managed it. He nearly managed it, Casimir agreed. And then the buyer turned out to be the one man in the world who had already decided you were the only thing in that entire building worth keeping. He leaned forward, forearms on the table, closer now than they had been all night. Which brings me to the part I haven't told you yet. The money he skimmed, in the end, it did not come out of Ashcroft Vale's pocket at all. The acquisition was already funded, my capital was already sitting in the deal accounts, and had been for weeks, structured through a chain of vehicles that trace back, eventually, quietly, patiently, to me. He held her eyes. Tobin Hale has spent the last 3 months stealing $4 million from me. He simply doesn't know it yet. He thinks he robbed a tired, mid-tier real estate shop that was too busy planning its own retirement to ever count the change. Marin felt the floor tilt beneath her. She understood, suddenly, the distance between the world she'd woken up in that morning and the one she was now sitting inside. In her world, Tobin had committed fraud, and fraud had procedures, slow and survivable and staffed by reasonable people. In this man's world, Tobin had stolen from Casimir Dravos, and there were no procedures at all. What happens to him? She said. It wasn't quite a question. Casimir studied her for a long moment before he answered. That, he said, depends entirely on you, and I mean that. Here is the thing, Miss Voss. I could end him tonight without ever telling you the details of how. That is, in fact, how I have always done these things. Clean, quiet, no names spoken aloud. Nobody left in the room who has to carry the memory of watching. It's easier. It's tidier. It lets everyone sleep. He was quiet a moment, choosing the words with care. But I'm not at all sure that easier is what you're owed. You have spent 5 years being managed by men who made every important decision about your life in rooms you were never once allowed to stand inside. I find I don't particularly want to become one more of them. He sat back. So I am going to ask you a question that not one person in that firm ever thought to ask you. What do you want to happen here? You built the case. You kept every receipt. By any measure that matters, it's yours. Tell me how far you want it to go. For a long moment, Marin said nothing at all. She looked down at the single sheet of paper, and at the laptop, and out past the glass at the city lying flat and 40 floors below her, and then at the man across the table, who had, impossibly in the span of one day, handed her back the one thing every other person in her adult life had spent years taking from her: the sense that she was a person, things happened alongside, and with, and not merely to. Something in her that had been clenched shut for a very long time, finally, quietly, let go. I want him to know it was me, she said. Her voice was very low and very clear and did not shake at all. Not you, not the deal. Not luck, or timing, or some auditor. He never met me. The furniture. I want him sitting across a table from me, and I want him to fully understand that the woman he spent 2 years stepping on is the exact reason his life is about to come apart in his hands. She swallowed. And then I want it to actually come apart. All of it. Everything he ever built by standing on top of somebody smaller and calling it mentorship. I don't want him comfortable and quiet somewhere 3 states over. I want him to have nothing. I want him to have exactly what he spent this morning trying to leave me with. Casimir looked at her across the table for a long, weighing moment. And then, for the first time all day, he smiled. A real one, small and cold, and underneath the cold, unmistakably, something very close to delight. Miss Voss, he said, rising and extending his hand across the table toward her. I think you and I are going to get along extraordinarily well. She took it. His grip was warm and certain, and it was, she realized as she shook it, the first handshake of her adult life, that felt like an equal meeting an equal, rather than a supplicant being briefly, generously tolerated. There is one more name, he said, not yet letting go of her hand, and you should hear it from me, now tonight, rather than find it yourself at 3 in the morning, because it is going to hurt you, and I would rather it hurt you here. When my people finished peeling back the layers of Calderon Trust, they found a second signature buried underneath Tobin's. Someone senior had to personally approve Meridian as an authorized vendor for any of this to clear the firm's own internal system in the first place. Someone whose approval no one would ever question. Someone who signed off, quietly, on the exact shell subcontractor that was robbing his own company blind on the very eve of his selling it, and who took a private fee into a private account for the simple act of looking the other way. He held her eyes, because he had already learned that she would always rather be shown the blade than feel it slide in unseen. It was Gideon. They did it in the conference room. Marin chose it herself, the same glass box on the 41st floor, where barely 30 hours earlier she had been told to go and fetch coffee for the adults. Casimir had raised an eyebrow at the choice, then, understanding it completely, said nothing. Some reckonings require the correct address. By the time Tobin Hale arrived, summoned by an email he believed had come from Gideon, something vague about restructuring the terms. The real deal was already done. Casimir had not, in the end, bought Ashcroft Vale at all. He had bought its debt, every note, every loan, every line of credit the firm carried, from banks delighted to sell the paper to a buyer offering full value in cash before the markets opened. He did not own the building. He owned the mortgage on every decision made inside it. In practice, these amounted to the same thing, and the second left no fingerprints on a sale that had, on paper, simply collapsed of its own weight. Tobin walked in with his charm, fully reassembled overnight, his color back, a leather folder under one arm, and a whole strategy behind his teeth. He'd had a day and a night to think, and had clearly decided the winning play was contrition, a rueful acknowledgement that yesterday had gotten heated, a graceful pivot back into being the most reasonable person in the room. He got 3 full steps into the conference room before he saw who was sitting at the head of the table. Marin, not at the side, where she had sat for 5 years, not standing by the door with a coffee pot, at the head, in Gideon Ashby's own chair, with a single slim folder squared perfectly in front of her, and Casimir Dravos standing silent at the tall window just behind her right shoulder, like a shadow that had finally learned how to stand up on its own. "What is this?" Tobin said. The reassembled charm slipped a full notch on the word. "Sit down, Tobin." Marin's voice was calm. She had practiced calm her whole life, under every kind of pressure a person could practice it. Today, for the first time, it belonged to her completely. "You're going to want to be sitting down for this." He did not sit. He turned instinctively toward the man at the window, the old reflex, because men in rooms had always been where his power came from. "Look, I don't know what she's told you," he said to Casimir. Past her, as though she were furniture again. "But Marin's had a hard couple of days, and she's not exactly reliable right now. Look at me, Tobin, not at him." Marin's voice cut clean across the room. "He's not going to save you. He's the reason there's nothing left to save." And something in the flat, unbothered certainty of it finally reached through to him, because Tobin stopped talking, and slowly, stiffly, as though his own body were arguing with him about it, he sat. She opened the folder and walked him through the whole of it herself, in her own voice, taking her time. The 4 heart-line draws, one at a time. The Meridian invoices beside them. The 90-day-old registration. The strip mall mailbox. And then the layers of Calderon trust, peeling each one back in front of him, until she reached the single beneficial owner. The entire architecture had been built to hide. And she watched his face the whole time, watched him comprehend that she did not merely suspect this, she had it, all of it. Documented, dated, cross-referenced, in the meticulous, invisible way the man across from her had spent 2 years being far too contemptuous to notice. "You built this to skim the firm during the handover," she said. "You buried my flag in a drawer so that when the gap finally surfaced, the model itself would look unreliable, and by extension, so would I. And then you humiliated me in front of the buyers this morning, so that if anyone ever did pull the thread, the story would already be sitting there pre-written and signed and witnessed. Careless girl, emotional. Made a $4 million mistake and got let go for cause. Who could ever trust her numbers after that?" She closed the folder. "You spent me, Tobin. You've been spending me. A little at a time, for years. It was the only thing you were ever genuinely good at, and some part of me always knew it, and stayed anyway." Okay, his hands had gone white-knuckled around the table edge. And even now, cornered, she could see him still calculating, still running the angles, still hunting the exit. "Okay, I hear you, it's a real problem, and I want to fix it. I'll return every dollar tonight, all of it, with interest. We don't need to involve." His eyes flicked, at last, helplessly, to Casimir at the window. "We don't need to make this any bigger than an internal firm matter. That's all this is. It's internal. It stays in this room." "It stopped being an internal matter," Casimir said, speaking for the first time since Tobin had entered. "The precise moment you stole from me, the room went completely silent." "You didn't rob Ashcroft Vale, Mr. Hale." Casimir came around the long table without hurry, and set both hands flat on the back of the empty chair beside Tobin's, leaning in slightly, and his voice never rose above conversational. And that was the most unbearable thing about it. "The money you moved so carefully through Meridian was mine before your fingers ever touched it. My capital funded that acquisition weeks ago. Every draw you skimmed, every slice you took directly out of my pocket. For 3 straight months, you have been diligently stealing from a man whose name, I can see it happening on your face right now, you are only just this second beginning to recognize." He let it settle. "You've been extraordinarily lucky and never even knew to be grateful for it, because it took me until yesterday, to so much as learn your name. And the only reason I finally did? You put your hand on her shoulder. In a room I happened to be standing at the back of Tobin's. Mouth opened. Nothing came out. Every ounce of the charm, all the practiced angles, the whole lifetime of frictionless escape from every room he'd ever talked his way out of. Gone at last, and gone in front of the one person he'd been most certain would never matter. Here is what happens now, Casimir said, straightening back up to his full height. Every dollar returns tonight. Though you'll discover, when you go to move it, that you no longer have the access to move anything yourself that has already been handled some hours ago while you slept and rehearsed your apology. The Calderon structure, and your name at the bottom of it, goes to the people whose profession is prosecuting exactly this, packaged so cleanly they will barely have to work. You will not present another model, sit on another board, or shake another hand in this city, because everyone in it whose opinion ever mattered to you will have your file by Monday morning. Your father's friends will stop returning your calls first. They always do. And the apartment you kept, and, here? Marin's breath caught silently in her chest because she had never told him that detail, and understood in that instant that he had simply known it, read it clean off her face the night before, the way he seemed to know everything. You'll lose that too. Along with every other thing you ever kept, by standing on top of someone smaller than you and calling it your due. You are going to have exactly what you tried, this morning, to leave her holding. He tilted his head a fraction, which is nothing, and you are going to spend the rest of your life knowing that the woman you sent to fetch the coffee is the one who reached down and took it all. You can't. Tobin started, and it came out cracked and small. I already have, Casimir said. This is only the part where you find out about it. And then the door at the far end of the conference room opened. Emerick stood holding it. And beside him, gray-faced and a decade older than he had looked the morning before, stood Gideon Ashby, who had come up believing he was arriving to manage a crisis, and understood the instant he took in the glass box that he was arriving to be shown his own place in it. Tobin turned in his chair and saw him, and something ugly and desperate leapt up in his face. Gideon, thank God! Tell them this is— Sit down, Gideon, Marin said. She did not raise her voice, and she did not offer him a chair, and Tobin fell silent at the sound of the old man's first name, in her mouth. You should stay for this next part, both of you. It's about your second signature. Gideon Ashby did not move from the doorway. I don't know what you think you've found, he said. But the bluster was already thin, leaking air, the voice of a man reading his own ending off a wall. You approved Meridian personally, Marin said. Your signature, your vendor authorization code. Nobody else in this building could have cleared a 90-day-old shell into the payment system. And you did it in an afternoon, without a single question, for a company you'd never heard of, 3 weeks before you were due to sell the firm and retire. She slid a single page out from under the folder and turned it to face him across the length of the room. And then, $11,000 moved into an account in your wife's maiden name the following morning. I found that one myself. It wasn't even hidden. Well, I think you'd stopped believing anyone was still watching. The silence in the glass room was absolute. Gideon stared at the page. He was far too far away to read, and did not need to. 40 years of a carefully compounded name, the letters of which were etched into the marble of his own lobby, 41 floors below, and he had signed all of it away, quietly, cheaply, for a fee he could no longer even remember the size of, to hold the door open for the two men now watching his face come apart. You sold the thread that hanged you both, Casimir said, to the man robbing you to speed a sale to the man buying you. That is not even corruption, Gideon. Corruption has ambition in it. That is just a man who stopped paying attention to the one person in his building who never did. He stepped back from Tobin's chair. Emerick will see you each to separate cars. You'll both find, over the coming days, that the ground you've spent your lives standing on belonged to me the entire time, and that I am calling it in. It was nearly midnight before the building finally emptied of everyone but the two of them. The 41st floor had never in its life been so quiet. The partners had all been sent home to lie awake and sleep badly. Gideon Ashby had gone down and out through the parking garage, ruined and silent and alone, having learned in a single afternoon that the fee he had once pocketed for holding a door had cost him the name carved into his own lobby wall and any version of the future soft enough to retire into. Tobin was gone, walked out to a waiting car by men who never once raised their voices, out into a long night that would take everything he had from him slowly and methodically, as he'd been promised it would. The reckoning was over. What was left behind in the wake of it was stillness, and the low electric hum of the city through the glass, and Marin standing alone at the window, with her arms wrapped around herself, looking down at all the lights. Kashmir came and stood beside her, not too close. For a while neither of them said anything at all. "I keep waiting to feel it," she said, finally. I don't even know what to call it. Victory. Everyone always makes it sound like it's supposed to feel like something enormous. She watched the traffic thread itself through the dark far below. And mostly I just feel how tired I've been. For years. Like I've been holding one breath for 5 years straight, and someone finally leaned over and told me I was allowed to let it out. And now my whole body doesn't know what on earth to do with all this air. That's exactly what it feels like, Casimir said. The stories all lie about it. It was never going to feel like triumph. It feels like the precise moment you're finally allowed to set a weight down and find out, all at once, how much it had been weighing the whole time you carried it and called it nothing. He looked over at her. "You carried a great deal, Miss Voss. Far more than anyone in this building ever once bothered to stop and weigh." She turned away from the glass to face him. Up close, in the low light, he looked less like the quiet terror who had emptied a conference room that morning, and more like the thing he had let her glimpse across the corner table of a nameless restaurant. A man who had spent a very long life not looking directly at other people, and who had, for reasons he did not appear to fully understand even now, made exactly one exception. "Why did you do all of this?" she asked him. "And please don't tell me again that it's because he stole from you. You could have handled that part in a single hour, quietly, from a phone, without ever once pulling me out of that room and into any of it. You told me that yourself. Clean. No names, nobody has to watch." She searched his face in the dark. "You didn't do quiet. You did this. All of it. Why?" Casimir was silent for a long moment, and when he finally answered her, she could hear that it cost him something to say it out loud. "Because I very nearly didn't see you at all," he said. "I walked into that room this morning to buy a company and learn no one's name, and I very nearly succeeded at just that. If that man had made his little speech 30 seconds earlier, before I had sat down, before I had watched you, I would have signed the check and flown home that afternoon and never once known that you existed. And you would have been fired that same week for his theft. You'd have lost the job and the reference and your brother's care and the studio and every other thing, quietly, without a sound, the exact way it happens every day to 1,000 people I have spent my whole life training myself never to look at." He turned to face her fully now. "I have spent my entire life being the kind of man the world is built to protect, and I built a great deal of that world myself, with my own hands. And this morning I stood at the back of a room and watched that same world try to grind a person into nothing while everyone in it looked politely away. And for the first time in longer than I can tell you, I understood specifically what my particular kind of comfort actually costs. And who has always been the one paying for it?" His jaw tightened. "So, no, I couldn't do quiet. Quiet is the precise thing they had already spent 5 years doing to you. You deserve to be seen taking it all back, loudly. In the exact room where they tried to erase you." And Marin felt the very last of it finally give way inside her. The careful, clenched, 5-year architecture of a woman who had made herself as small as she possibly could, so that nobody would ever have anything worth taking, felt the whole structure of it dissolve at once because a man had just said to her plainly, the one true thing that no one in her life had ever thought to offer her, that the smallness had never once been her fault and had never once been necessary and was, as of tonight, finished. I don't know how to not carry things, she said, and her voice broke clean across the middle of it. I don't know who I even am if I'm not the one holding everybody else up. That's, that's the only version of myself I've ever been allowed to be. I don't know what's underneath it. Then we'll find the other versions, Casimir said. You have time now. Time, and considerably better accountants. One corner of his mouth moved. Your brother's care is already handled permanently. Through my trust, not out of your salary. That stopped being your weight to carry the moment you told me his name. The lease on the studio is done. Whenever you want it done. And you are going to run the thing you have quietly, secretly been running for 5 years. Except that this time, your name will be on the door of it, and your number will have a comma in it that was never there before. His voice dropped into a low, level register that raised the hair on her arms again. And if anyone at all, in this city ever tries to make you small again, they are going to discover, very quickly and very personally, that the furniture belongs to me now, and that I am extraordinarily protective of what's mine. It surprised a laugh out of her, wet and startled, and entirely real, and he watched it happen with something like open wonder on his face, as though he had genuinely forgotten that a person could look the way she looked in that moment. I prefer partner, she said, to furniture. Yes, Casimir agreed, very quietly. So do I. The story finished, the way these stories always seem to, not with a gunshot, but with the slow rearrangement of everyone's world. By the time the sun came up, by the end of that week, the name ASHCROFT, VALE, came down off the wall, flickering H and all, and a different one went up in its place. Casimir kept the firm. A legitimate, respected, well-liked development company was, after all, the clean skin he had come looking for in the first place. And it had turned out to be a far better investment, the moment he finally understood what had been holding the whole thing upright all along. But he did not run it himself. He installed the one person who always quietly had. Maren Voss took the corner office. Not because a powerful man decided to give it to her. She'd have refused it outright if it had ever been framed that way. And he knew her well enough by then to know it, but because she had earned it across 5 years of unpaid, uncredited, invisible nights. And because when Casimir laid the firm's true performance history out flat on the table in front of the surviving partners and asked them, evenly, which one of them could even name the person who had personally built every model that had kept them all solvent for half a decade, not a single one of them had been able to lift his eyes to look at her. The vote took under a minute. The comma appeared in her salary. And her brother's care, for the first time since the accident, was simply, permanently handled, a fact she still found herself checking 3 times a week, like pressing on a bruise she could not quite believe had finally stopped hurting. Tubin Hale learned, at last, exactly what nothing felt like, and he learned it the way he'd made her learn everything. One loss at a time. The prosecutors were thorough. His father's friends were nowhere near as loyal as he'd assumed. The apartment went first, and then the rest. The city he had charmed so effortlessly for so many years closed over his head without a ripple, and the last anyone ever heard, he was 3 states away, and using a slightly different version of his own name, discovering the hard way that charm is worth remarkably little to people who have already read your file. He never did fully understand, not really, not all the way down, that the quiet woman he had once sent to fetch the coffee had been the hand behind all of it. Maren found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was entirely at peace with that. She had not done it to be understood by him. She had done it to stop being erased by him. And Gideon Ashby retired to his vineyard after all, a smaller and lonelier one than the one he had spent 40 years describing to junior partners. Worked by no one, visited by fewer, having traded an entire lifetime's reputation for a single quiet signature and one fee whose exact size he could no longer remember. On a flat, gray morning some weeks later, Marin stood at the window of the corner office with a cup of black coffee she had made for herself and no one else on earth, and watched the enormous city she had only ever once seen from the sidewalk lay itself out in full beneath her, 40 floors down. Casimir found her there. He came by most mornings now. A man who had spent his whole life keeping a careful, comfortable distance from everyone, discovering rather late in it that he liked standing close to exactly one person in the world. "You're early," she said, without turning around. "I'm always early," he said. "You never see the truth of a place after it. Already knows you're coming." She smiled at the glass. "And what's the truth of this place?" He considered her for a moment. The woman in gray, who no longer dressed each morning to disappear, standing now at the head of the whole thing, with her own coffee going cold in her hand. That every single one of them spent 5 years stepping on the most valuable thing in the building, he said. And it took a man who walked in to buy the place to finally look down and see it. He set his hand lightly on her shoulder, the very same shoulder, the very same gesture another man had once used in this same building to make her small, and this time it meant the exact opposite of small. They humiliated you to keep you furniture. They just never once stopped to wonder who might be standing at the back of the room, watching the whole thing. Marin reached up and covered his hand with her own. They had tried to make an example of her. They had made a queen instead. And the man, none of them ever noticed watching, had gone and spent everything he had to make certain the entire city would learn her name. Because the surest way in this world to lose absolutely everything, it turns out, is to humiliate the one person nobody ever thought was worth watching, in a room that happens just that once, to hold someone who was beery. That is how you turn furniture into a throne. If this one hit you, the way it hit me, while I was writing it, if you felt that turn land, when the man nobody noticed finally set down his glass and spoke, or that moment when Marin took the head of the table in the very same room where they'd told her to go fetch the coffee, then do the one thing that keeps stories like this one coming. Smash that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me down in the comments, what was your favorite moment of Marin's revenge? The email climbing the wall in 4-foot letters, the get your own coffee, or the whole reckoning in the glass room? I read every one of them. Share this with someone in your life who's ever been treated like furniture by people who had absolutely no idea what they were standing on. And I'll see you in the next one.